November 22nd, 1963. The United States was about to witness one of the most unforgettable days in its history. The Dallas sky was sunny, the wind was gentle. A morning that started like any ordinary day would leave an indelible mark on millions of memories. President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, simply Jack. To the people, he was more than just a politician, charismatic, young, energetic, and full of hope. In the most tense years of the Cold War, he was a figure who gave Americans confidence and promised a brighter future. On the campaign trails, he was welcomed by thousands of enthusiastic crowds, launching his journey with the promise of a new frontier. His powerful speeches, his bright smile, and the elegant image he built with his wife Jacqueline. All of this turned Kennedy into not just a president, but the symbol of an entire era. But behind the scenes, things were not so innocent. In Washington, power struggles were constant, from the CIA to the Pentagon, from mafia connections to oil barons. Many groups questioned Kennedy's decisions. Especially after the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was said that Kennedy had made powerful enemies. The purpose of his Dallas visit was actually simple: to gain support for the upcoming elections. Texas was critical for the Democratic Party. Kennedy wanted to connect directly with the people and renew trust. With Jacqueline by his side, with Governor Connolly, they all got into that open-top limousine to greet the crowds. The streets of Dallas were alive with extraordinary energy that day. People filled the sidewalks waving flags, eager to see Jack and Jackie. Children were waving their hands. Women were smiling as they threw flowers. Men felt the pride of seeing an American president in person. But in those same streets, invisible shadows were moving. Some intelligence reports had warned that Dallas could be dangerous. Kennedy's advisors had raised concerns, but the president didn't want to be separated from the people. He always chose to stay among them. He was even said to have remarked, "If someone truly wants to harm me, there's no way to stop it, so I won't distance myself from the people." And that morning, time seemed to slow down. As Kennedy's car approached Dealey Plaza, the most examined images in history were about to be recorded. A man named Zapruder, just an ordinary citizen, would capture on his camera the moments that the entire world would watch and debate over and over again. The crowd in Dallas was cheering, Kennedy was smiling, but behind the curtain, some hands were already reaching for the trigger. And when that moment came, America would never be the same again. John F. Kennedy's charm in the eyes of the public was, at the same time, his greatest weakness. As many loved him, there were also those who hated him. In newspapers, he was portrayed as a shining leader. In homes, his posters decorated the walls. But behind closed doors, his policies unsettled groups whose interests were at risk. His growing tension with the CIA, especially after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, had only made matters worse. Kennedy had halted certain intelligence operations, trying to put limits on elements that behaved like a state within a state. This was not welcomed in Washington's dark corridors. Meanwhile, Jacqueline Kennedy's presence was another source of magnetism. Jackie was not only graceful, but also a reassuring figure for the people. The Kennedy family was referred to as America's royal family, making headlines around the world. And this is why the Dallas trip was never just an ordinary campaign stop. It was a day that carried both hope and tension at the same time. In those very moments when all eyes were fixed on him, President Kennedy was only seconds away from the most controversial event in American history. After the shots were fired, time seemed to freeze. People screamed, ducked, and chaos erupted in Dealey Plaza. Yet for decades after, the echoes of those gunshots would continue to haunt the American mind. But to truly understand why November 22nd became such a turning point, we have to look deeper into the days, months, and years leading up to it. John F. Kennedy was not just any president. He was young, Catholic, and from a wealthy family. His rise to the White House in 1960 symbolized a new generation of leadership. He defeated Richard Nixon in one of the closest elections in U.S. history, with television debates shaping the outcome for the very first time. People didn't just listen to Kennedy, they saw him. His charm, his confidence, his calm smile under pressure. That made a difference. But the presidency is never just about appearances. Behind the elegance, Kennedy faced enormous challenges. The Cold War was at its height. The Soviet Union was expanding influence, nuclear weapons were a daily fear, and the world seemed constantly on the edge of destruction. In 1961 came the Bay of Pigs invasion, an embarrassing failure. The CIA had trained Cuban exiles to overthrow Fidel Castro, but the plan collapsed. Kennedy took public responsibility, yet privately, he was furious at how the intelligence community had misled him. This single event damaged his trust in the CIA, creating deep cracks between the president and his own security apparatus. And then came October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The world held its breath for 13 days as Soviet nuclear missiles were discovered in Cuba, just 90 miles from American shores. Kennedy's choices during that crisis were delicate, and history now credits him with preventing World War III. He resisted pressures from his generals, who demanded airstrikes and invasion. Instead, he pushed for a blockade and negotiated secretly with the Soviets. It worked. The missiles were removed. Kennedy was hailed as a hero, but not everyone was happy. Inside Washington's corridors, some considered him too soft, too willing to compromise, even dangerous for America's global dominance. Beyond foreign policy, Kennedy was also challenging the establishment at home. He had announced plans to withdraw thousands of U.S. advisors from Vietnam, a move that hinted he might resist the full-scale war that many military and political leaders were preparing for. For powerful figures in the defense industry, this was unsettling. War meant money, influence, and control. Peace was not profitable. And then there was his stance on the Federal Reserve and big business. Kennedy had signed executive orders that some interpreted as an attempt to weaken private banking influence over the U.S. economy. Though these moves are still debated, they added to the list of reasons why certain groups saw him as a threat to the status quo. Of course, there were also his personal scandals. Kennedy's private life was far from perfect. Rumors of affairs, especially the whispers involving Marilyn Monroe, made headlines and fed gossip columns. While the public saw a perfect couple in Jack and Jackie, behind closed doors the reality was more complicated. Enemies in politics sometimes used these vulnerabilities to undermine his image. Still, Kennedy's popularity with ordinary people only grew stronger. He represented hope, progress, and youth at a time when America wanted to believe in a brighter future. His speeches about civil rights, his promise to put a man on the moon, his calls for unity, all of it inspired millions. But inspiration alone cannot silence opposition. In fact, the more he inspired, the more he threatened entrenched interests. The Secret Service had warned about Dallas. Some local groups openly disliked Kennedy. Anti-Kennedy advertisements had run in Texas newspapers, and flyers accusing him of treason had circulated on the streets. On the morning of November 22nd, tensions were already in the air. Yet Kennedy, true to his character, refused to hide. He wanted to be seen, to connect, to wave to the people. The motorcade route through Dallas had been published in advance. Everyone knew where the president would be. For security experts, this was a nightmare scenario. Open cars, tall buildings, wide turns, all perfect opportunities for an attack. But Kennedy believed that the risks were worth the connection with the crowd. As the limousine entered Dealey Plaza, events unfolded with chilling precision. Lee Harvey Oswald would later be accused of pulling the trigger from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. But was he truly the lone gunman, or just a piece of a larger puzzle? Witness testimonies conflicted. Some swore shots came from the grassy knoll, others insisted they heard gunfire from multiple directions. The Zapruder film became the most analyzed home movie in history, slowed down frame by frame, dissected endlessly, as if it might reveal the truth hidden between the blinks of an eye. Oswald's life only added to the mystery. A former Marine, fluent in Russian, who had defected to the Soviet Union and then returned to America. How does a man like that just slip back into U.S. society? He had connections with pro-Castro groups, anti-Castro exiles, and even shadowy figures in New Orleans. To some, Oswald looked less like a lone wolf and more like a carefully placed pawn. And then came the most bizarre twist of all. Just 2 days after Kennedy's death, Oswald himself was killed, shot on live television by Jack Ruby, a Dallas nightclub owner with known ties to organized crime. Millions watched in shock. A nation already grieving now had more questions than answers. Why would Ruby risk everything? Was it revenge? Or was it to silence Oswald before he could talk? The Warren Commission was established to investigate, and it concluded that Oswald acted alone. But not everyone was convinced. Over the years, evidence seemed to vanish. Witnesses changed their stories, and secrecy surrounded key files. Conspiracy theories spread. The CIA, the Mafia, Cuban exiles, even Lyndon Johnson, all accused at different times of being part of a wider plot. The assassination became not just a crime, but a riddle that still divides historians and truth seekers today. But beyond the conspiracies, one truth is undeniable. Kennedy's death marked the end of innocence for America. The 1960s would unravel into protests, assassinations, and turmoil. Martin Luther King Jr., Robert Kennedy, Vietnam, Watergate. The decades spiraled into distrust and division. November 22nd was the moment the American dream cracked. And yet Kennedy's legacy endured. His words, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," still echo across generations. His vision for space exploration led to the moon landing. His push for civil rights paved the way for future reforms. Even in death, Kennedy remained larger than life, a symbol of both what America could be and what it lost. As the motorcade sped toward Parkland Hospital that day, doctors would desperately fight to save him. But the truth is, the moment those shots rang out in Dealey Plaza, the course of history had already changed forever. Even today, more than half a century later, the echoes of those gunshots in Dallas still shake the American conscience. The loss of President John F. Kennedy was not just the end of one man's life. It was the end of a vision, a dream, and a belief that leadership could be both youthful and idealistic in a time of fear and division. What followed after Kennedy's death was a nation struggling to redefine itself. Vice President Lyndon Johnson, sworn in just hours after the tragedy, carried forward some of Kennedy's unfinished business, especially the Civil Rights Act, which Kennedy had begun pushing before his assassination. Johnson signed it into law in 1964, a landmark in American history. In a way, Kennedy's death gave momentum to a cause he believed in deeply. But the darker side of history cannot be ignored. The Vietnam War escalated soon after, leading to years of bloodshed, protests, and a divided America. Many have wondered, if Kennedy had lived, would Vietnam have been avoided? Would the lives of thousands of young Americans and millions of Vietnamese have been spared? We will never know, but the question still lingers, shaping the way people view his presidency. Culturally, Kennedy's assassination also transformed the role of media in America. The live broadcast of events, from the shooting itself to Oswald's murder on live television, changed forever how people experienced history. For the first time, the tragedy unfolded not just in newspapers or radio, but in living rooms, in real time. shaping how the world saw America. And then there are the files, the assassination records, some still classified even decades later, fuel suspicion that the whole truth has never been told. Each new release sparks debates, documentaries, and arguments across the world. Some people firmly believe Oswald acted alone, while others are convinced powerful groups orchestrated the killing. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, or perhaps it will never fully be known. Yet despite the mystery, Kennedy's image has endured as one of hope, courage, and change. People remember the vibrant young president who stood in Berlin and declared, "Ich bin ein Berliner." They remembered the leader who dreamed of sending humans to the moon, who spoke of freedom and civil rights, who inspired a generation to believe in public service and sacrifice. And maybe that's the greatest legacy of John F. Kennedy. Not just the policies he left behind, but the inspiration he gave. He reminded Americans and the world that politics could be more than power struggles. It could be about vision, about lifting people higher, about daring to dream big, even in dark times. Today, when you walk through Dealey Plaza, you can still feel the weight of history. The spot on the road where the shot struck is marked. Tourists gather, and the 6th floor of the old book depository has become a museum. It is as if time itself refuses to let go of that moment. The air feels heavy, the silence almost sacred. It is a reminder that one event, one man, one day can change the destiny of an entire nation. But history is not only about loss, it's also about learning. Kennedy's story challenges us to question power, to demand transparency, and to remember that leadership is fragile, that it can be taken away in an instant. And above all, it challenges us to keep alive the ideals he spoke of: courage, service, and the belief that together we can build a better future. So as we close this journey into the life and death of John F. Kennedy, let us not only remember the tragedy, but also the inspiration. His voice, his words, and his vision still live on. And maybe, just maybe, that is the part of him that was never assassinated. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like it, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below. Let us know your thoughts, your theories, and most importantly, who you would like us to cover next. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life, and we'd love to hear what you think. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and never stop seeking the truth.